On a quiet Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, millions of Americans sat down to watch the president. The screen flickered, and Richard Nixon told the country he was temporarily suspending the dollar's convertibility into gold. In living rooms and diners, it sounded technical, almost boring, but in the dealing rooms of London, Zurich, and Paris, jaws dropped. That sentence ended a promise the world had lived under for a quarter century. If you held dollars, you could turn them into gold at $35 an ounce. The next morning, phones rang off the hook. Dealers repriced everything. A single announcement had just severed money from metal. If gold was supposed to anchor trust, why did we cut the rope? That's the puzzle. And the answer is simpler and more human than most textbooks admit. To understand why every gold standard broke, start with what a gold standard really is: a national budget of trust. When a country says, our currency is redeemable for a fixed amount of gold, it's making a binding promise about tomorrow governments can spend only what they can tax, borrow at gold's interest, or draw from a finite reserve. Boom times feel orderly. Prices are stable. Capital flows. But the promise has a hidden cost. It removes the shortcuts: printing, surprise inflation, financial repression that politicians love when pressure rises. The system works beautifully until life stops cooperating. Take the classical gold standard before World War I. London was the hub. Bills settled smoothly. A merchant in Buenos Aires trusted a banker in Liverpool because pounds meant gold and gold meant the same thing in every port. But even then, the machine had a bias. When a country ran a trade deficit, gold flowed out. To defend the peg, its central bank raised rates, credit tightened, wages fell. Adjustment came through pain. Surpluses felt fine. Deficits felt like unemployment. The social cost was real, but hidden inside the myth of discipline. Then came August 1914. Mobilization orders spread across Europe, and within days nearly every major power suspended gold convertibility. War doesn't wait for peacetime rules. Governments needed money, fast, to feed armies, build shells, and keep railways running. Gold reserves were too small and too slow for the scale of the emergency paper filled the gap. By the armistice, finances were shattered. Prices had doubled or tripled. Debts towered over economies that suddenly had to rebuild. And yet, after the war, treasuries tried to go back. They missed the most important rule: you don't step into the same river twice. Britain offers the cautionary tale. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, restored the pound to its pre-war gold parity. It was a patriotic symbol, a promise that Britain was still Britain. But prices and wages were no longer 1914. The world had moved on. At the old rate, British exports were expensive and unemployment stuck like a stain. To defend the peg, the Bank of England raised interest rates. Industry starved for credit while New York boomed. London kept its pride and imported a recession. By September 1931, markets called the bluff. With gold draining out and depositors queuing, Britain abandoned gold. The most stable currency on earth had lasted 6 years back on the standard. Across the Atlantic, the pattern turned harsher. The United States stayed on gold longer, insisting on orthodoxy as bank failures mounted and crop prices collapsed. The gold standard demanded deflation to restore balance. Democracy demanded relief. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt chose relief. He declared a bank holiday, restricted gold exports, and later revalued gold from $20.67 to $35 an ounce, devaluing the dollar to lift domestic prices and incomes. The move shocked creditors and soothed farmers. On paper, it broke faith. In practice, it saved the patient. That's the uncomfortable truth. In crises, the gold standard often asked governments to defend a number on a chart instead of people in a breadline. Voters noticed. After World War II, the world tried a compromise. Bretton Woods. Currencies would be fixed to the dollar, and the dollar alone would be convertible into gold at $35, only for foreign central banks. It was a hybrid, a gold anchor with dollar scaffolding. For a while, it worked brilliantly. War-torn economies rebuilt, trade exploded. The U.S. sat atop 2/3 of the world's gold, but a new tension crept in, one that economist Robert Triffin warned about. If the world needed dollars to grow, America had to supply them by running deficits. The more dollars the world held, the more it could question whether the U.S. really had enough gold to redeem them all. The system needed the very thing that would eventually break it: dollar abundance. By the 1960s, you could feel the strain. Europe and Japan had recovered. The U.S. was financing both the Great Society and the Vietnam War. Dollars poured out. Gold trickled back. To defend the $35 peg, central banks formed the London Gold Pool, an 8-nation agreement to sell gold into the market whenever the price tried to rise. Imagine trying to hold back the tide with sandbags. In March 1968, a speculative surge forced the pool to shut the London gold market for 2 weeks. When it reopened, authorities split the world into 2 tiers: official transactions still at $35, private trading at whatever price the market would bear. Everyone could see the game now. The anchor was fraying. Which brings us back to that Sunday night in 1971. Nixon's temporary suspension was the admission the system couldn't square its circle. America couldn't both be the world's dollar provider and promise gold at a fixed price forever. The math and the politics refused to match. Within a few years, the world settled into today's regime: fiat currencies, floating exchange rates, gold as an asset instead of money. Many called it the end of discipline, others called it realism. Either way, the promise was gone, and most people kept using money anyway. So why did every gold standard break? Not because gold failed, but because gold made governments choose again and again between external promises and internal stability. War, depression, and mass unemployment pushed leaders to pick jobs over parities, food over formulas. The gold standard demanded symmetrical adjustment, both surplus and deficit nations doing their share. In practice, surplus countries hoarded stability while deficit countries absorbed the pain. The politics were never neutral. The system assumed patience and suffered elections. There's a second reason: growth. A fixed quantity of reserves must support a growing web of credit. When trade is small and capital closed, the mechanism can breathe. But as finance deepens and money speeds up, shocks arrive faster, spillovers travel farther, and the gold drain turns into a cliff. Defending the peg requires rate hikes into recessions, fiscal austerity in downturns, and wage cuts in democracies that can vote you out. The textbook calls it credibility. Citizens call it misery. At some point, an administration chooses to bend the rule rather than break the country. That doesn't make gold irrelevant. The metal still matters because it sits outside the system. No one's liability, no one's central bank. In some crises, its price signals distrust of policy. In others, it absorbs demand from households or central banks looking for insurance. But gold's enduring role isn't proof that a gold standard can hold. It's proof that people still crave an anchor when promises feel cheap. The anchor can guide you. It cannot row for you. If there's a lesson here for our time, it isn't nostalgic. It's practical. Every monetary system, metallic or fiat, rests on a trade-off between flexibility and restraint. Gold imposed restraint and broke on flexibility. Fiat grants flexibility and risks abusing it. The question isn't gold or paper. It's what will we sacrifice when pressure rises? Numbers or neighbors? The classical gold standard sacrificed employment to defend parities. The interwar attempt sacrificed legitimacy to defend nostalgia. Bretton Woods sacrificed convertibility to keep a growing world liquid. Each break was a political choice disguised as a monetary event. Picture that again: a Sunday night address, a calm tone, a fragile promise dissolving into new rules on Monday morning. History makes it look inevitable. It wasn't. It was a decision to prioritize breathing over bragging, jobs over a price of metal chosen in another decade. That's why every gold standard broke, not because people stopped believing in gold, but because people insisted their money served the society that used it, not the other way around. If you remember that, the story of gold isn't a fall from grace. It's a reminder that money is a tool we keep reshaping to survive the world we actually live in. And the next time someone offers an anchor that cures politics, debt, and human impatience all at once, you'll know what to ask. Not is it pure, but what breaks when life gets loud?